Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
Every family has their traditions, some cozy and comforting, others like a slow, steady drip of emotional acid wearing down your skin year after year. Ours was Christmas Eve dinner, a ritual wrapped in gold-rimmed plates and the smell of rosemary ham, but underneath the surface, it was a showcase of hierarchy. At the top stood Caroline, my older sister, with her perfect suburban life, her doctor husband who looked like he stepped off the cover of a retirement fund brochure, and her two golden retriever kids. They were always greeted with extra chairs, custom place settings, and the all-important words in every invitation, Caroline and guest. It was understood, it was expected, it was deserved, or so everyone acted. Then there was me. For the last 10 years, every time that same formal email arrived from my mother's Gmail, because God forbid she uses anything remotely emotional like a phone call, it was addressed plainly, Natalie, just me, no +1, no and guest, not even a feel free to bring someone. The implication was thick and clear. I didn't need anyone, not because I wasn't dating, not because I didn't have friends or partners, but because in their eyes, I was the one who never quite fit into the image they wanted to present. Caroline was glossy, the picture-perfect daughter in a cardigan. I was a little too sharp, a little too bold, too independent to be lovable in a way they could brag about over wine and roasted carrots. At first, I swallowed it. I told myself maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just tradition. But when year after year, even when I was in long-term relationships, hell, once even engaged, they never made space. No extra chair, no bring whoever makes you happy. Just me, alone. At the end of the table near the drafty window, next to the stack of coats and the bowl of awkward cranberry sauce nobody touched. Once I brought it up gently, asked Mom if I could bring someone. Her response? A soft chuckle, followed by, "You don't need to worry about that." As if my need for companionship, for basic acknowledgement, was some kind of embarrassing hobby I should outgrow. Caroline's +1s were about celebrating love, commitment, family. Mine would be clutter. There's a kind of silence that happens when people deny your reality for so long. You start to turn inward. You question if maybe they're right. Maybe you are just easier on your own. Maybe you are too much. Or maybe, if you're me, you let that silence fill with something else. A plan. A long, slow burn of resentment that eventually becomes fuel. This year, it started early. October, maybe even late September. I knew the invite was coming. I knew what it would say. And I knew what it wouldn't. That morning, I woke up in my apartment, alone, again, checked my inbox, and there it was, Christmas Eve plans. From Mom, I clicked it. 3 sentences. Caroline and Matt will be arriving on the 23rd. We'll eat around 6. Hope you can make it. I stared at it for a full minute, not one mention of anyone else, not even a lazy and friend, just silence, like I was some ornament she pulled out of a dusty box once a year and placed neatly, where it wouldn't clash with the tree. I didn't respond. I closed the laptop, got dressed, and called Eli, my friend/occasional partner in chaos, who always knew how to turn pain into performance. I told him I wanted out, not just out of the dinner, out of the whole dynamic, out of the role they'd cast me in since I was 12 and decided to dye my hair black, and ask why Caroline got a car for her birthday when I got a used phone. I told him I wanted to go big. He asked how big. I said 6 people, Greece, Christmas, models, or at least people who look like models. He laughed, thought I was joking. Then he saw my face. The plan came together like a heist. We made a list, we booked tickets, and with every confirmation email, every excited RSVP, I felt something shift. I wasn't doing this just to shock them. I wasn't even doing it to punish them. I was reclaiming the narrative, not as the difficult daughter or the still single disappointment, but as someone who didn't need their table, their place cards, their pity. And here's the part I didn't expect. It wasn't hard to find 6 people who wanted to come. There was Jasmine, an art director I'd worked with who dressed like she walked through life on a runway. There was Leo, a quietly brilliant guy I once dated, who still sends me memes about broken families, and who, despite everything, never stopped answering my calls. There was Max, a sweet, chaotic hurricane of a human who kissed me once in a hurricane in Tulum and said, "You deserve everything." There was Jada, a body-positive influencer who made even airline pajamas look Qatar. And then Eli, who of course was coming. He wouldn't miss this for the world. The 6th? I'll keep that one secret for now. Let's just say he was the wild card. The one who would make my father's blood pressure tick up a notch. I didn't ask anyone's permission. I didn't tell Mom. I didn't even hint. I waited. And then one sunny morning on the 22nd of December, as my family back in Connecticut was likely stuffing gift bags and preheating ham, I posted the photo, 7 of us, on a yacht. A real goddamn yacht. Everyone was glowing, drinks in hand, sunglasses on, laughing like we had just been told we'd never have to attend a passive-aggressive family dinner again. I didn't caption it. Just let it sit there, let it breathe. 30 minutes later, I got a text from Dad. Just 5 words. "Who are these people?" And that was the moment everything began to change. It would be easy for someone on the outside to assume that the photo I posted, the now infamous yacht picture that froze our family group chat in digital amber, was some shallow stunt, a flashy rebellion meant to slap my parents across the face with filtered perfection and barely clothed bodies. A petty attempt to make a statement louder than all the years I spent quietly swallowing their indifference. But the truth is far less Instagram-worthy and much more precise. Because every single person in that photo wasn't just a beautiful face or a filler body used to decorate a Mediterranean backdrop. They were chosen, deliberately, thoughtfully, each one representing a layer of my past they had dismissed or ignored. Each one standing for a moment where I was invisible to the people who should have seen me first. The process started as a joke. Eli, always quick with the sarcasm that hides his razor-sharp intuition, texted me the night after I got the Christmas email and said, "So what kind of models are we talking here? High fashion, fitness, or just really hot librarians?" And for a moment I laughed, the kind of dry laugh that cracks open something deeper. And I realized I didn't just want 6 random people on a boat. I wanted ghosts made flesh, a living, breathing reminder of everything my parents had refused to acknowledge about me. My love life, my friendships, my heartbreaks, my victories, and most of all, my right to be complex, loud, and unapologetically whole. Jasmine was the first call I made, and not just because she had that look. The kind of effortless confidence that could make even a beige airport terminal feel like a movie set. But because she was there for me during one of the most humiliating moments of my life, when I'd gotten passed over for a promotion at work by a guy who once asked me if I was too emotional to manage a team, and I called my mom crying, hoping for a moment of maternal validation, but all she said was, maybe they were just looking for someone more steady. And it was Jasmine who stayed on the phone with me for 3 hours while I sat in my car outside a Dunkin' Donuts, convinced I was never going to feel respected anywhere by anyone. Then there was Leo, sweet, soft-spoken Leo, who I dated for nearly a year in my late 20s, and who my parents refused to even acknowledge because, as my mother once whispered while swirling her wine at Thanksgiving, "He doesn't have a real career, does he?" As if being a full-time youth counselor wasn't noble enough to deserve a seat at her table. Leo and I didn't work out for reasons neither of us could articulate clearly, but we stayed in touch, the kind of tender friendship that feels like a deep breath. And when I told him about the trip, he didn't even hesitate. He just asked what kind of bathing suit to bring. Max was next, and choosing him was the most indulgent part of the plan, because Max was chaos personified. Tall, tattooed, utterly unfiltered. The kind of man who once started a conversation at a bar by saying, "So how's your trauma today?" and somehow made it sexy. We met on a work trip, had a week-long fling that felt like a storm, beautiful, overwhelming, destined to destroy something. And even though it ended abruptly, I never forgot the way he looked at me, like I was the most interesting puzzle he'd ever touched. My family would hate him on sight, which of course made him perfect. Jada was someone I'd met more recently through a campaign I ran for a wellness brand that went viral, not because the product was good, it wasn't, but because Jada made the camera love her and everything she touched turned to authenticity. She was bold in a way I envied, loud with her joy and her rage alike. And when I told her I needed someone who could radiate unbothered energy while sipping champagne on the Aegean Sea, she laughed and said, "Girl, I'm already shopping for swimsuits." What my parents would see as loud and over the top, I saw as power. And of course, Eli, my co-conspirator, my anchor, my oldest friend who once told me, during a particularly drunk New Year's Eve in our 20s, that if he were straight, we'd have been married by now. And even though he wasn't, and we never would be, that moment held a certain intimacy no boyfriend ever matched. Eli knew every wound, every scar, every time my mom said, "Why can't you be more like Caroline?" And I smiled while bleeding inside. He wasn't just part of the plan. He was the plan. The last seat, the sixth, I left open for a while, unsure if I wanted to fill it, unsure if filling it would make it all too real. But then I remembered a man named Tomas, a European photographer who had once taken pictures of me for a small fashion feature, and who, afterward, told me over espresso that I had the saddest eyes he'd ever seen, and then, unlike everyone else, asked why. I never answered. I just thanked him and walked away. But I found his number, texted him out of nowhere, and when I told him I was planning a family reset, he replied with one word: "When?" Booking everything took less time than I expected. A chartered yacht, luxury villas, coordinated flights. Money wasn't the issue, not because I'm rich, but because I'd been saving for something big without knowing what for. This was it. This was what all the careful budgeting and skipped brunches were for. Not for a house or a wedding or a retirement fund. For liberation. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, my family sent occasional updates. Matt and Caroline are bringing homemade cookies. We got the good champagne again this year. Don't forget to bring a sweater. It's supposed to snow. Each message landed like a paper cut. Tiny reminders that nothing had changed. They still saw me as an afterthought, but I was building something. A parade of bodies and stories that would crash through their assumptions like a glitter bomb. On December 19th, I sent a message to our group chat. Just a single sentence. "Won't be able to make it this year, traveling." No explanation, no apology. My mother replied with a thumbs up. My father said nothing. Caroline sent a snowflake emoji. 3 days later, they would see the photo. 7 of us. Blue water, bronze skin, white wine, and not a single apology in sight. And for the first time in years, I felt enough. There's a certain kind of silence that comes after a well-placed explosion. Not the kind filled with smoke and shrapnel, but the kind that crackles across phone lines and email chains. The kind that sits in the corner of a well-decorated family living room like an unwelcome ghost, daring someone to speak first. That was the silence that settled in the family group chat after I sent the photo. One single calculated image from the deck of the yacht, snapped at just the right angle by Tomas, capturing not just the sun-streaked waves of the Aegean Sea and the unmistakable opulence of our surroundings, but also the curated perfection of 7 people who looked like they belonged in an advert for a fragrance so exclusive, it didn't even have a name, only a scent and a legacy. The picture wasn't an accident. It wasn't impulsive. It was composed like a painting, Jasmine with her long legs draped lazily across the chaise lounge, sipping something cold and sparkling. Max shirtless, tattoos on full display, a cigarette dangling from his fingers like a forgotten accessory. Jada laughing mid-sentence, all energy and fire, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf that whipped in the wind like a flag of unapologetic selfhood. Leo sitting close beside me, his hand resting gently, but pointedly, on my thigh, his expression unreadable but intimate. Eli in the background, sunglasses on, smirking knowingly as if he'd been waiting his whole life for this exact moment to happen. And Tomas, caught in the reflection of the yacht's polished glass, holding the camera like he was documenting history. Because in some twisted, private way, he was. I didn't add a caption. I didn't explain who they were, where we were, or why I was smiling in a way I hadn't smiled in years. Not forced, not polite, but real, unfiltered joy mixed with a hint of vengeance. I just let the photo hang there in the group chat like a live wire, and within minutes, the reaction began. The first message came from Caroline, of course, because she couldn't help herself. Her curiosity was always stronger than her discretion. "Wow, where are you?" she typed. And though the words were innocent enough, I could almost hear the edges of her voice, sharp with confusion and a low, simmering judgment that barely hid the jealousy underneath. She wasn't used to not knowing the full story, and she certainly wasn't used to seeing me, her awkward, moody sister, at the center of a tableau that could have easily belonged to her Instagram perfect life. I didn't reply. Then came my father's message, simple but seismic. Who are these people? Not a greeting, not a laugh, not even a poorly disguised compliment. Just confusion wrapped in exclamation, as if I had violated some unwritten family rule about remaining in my assigned role. The background character, the occasional punchline, the one who never brought anyone to dinner because she didn't need to. The tone of his message was so unmistakably bewildered that I almost pitied him, almost. Because for all his stern silences and passive complicity, it was his refusal to challenge the way my mother treated me that built this entire stage. Still, I didn't respond. Hours passed. Nothing from Mom. I imagined her standing in the kitchen, phone in hand, mouth slightly open, trying to find something appropriately maternal to say, while privately tallying how much this all must have cost, and whether the people in the photo looked safe. I imagined her wondering if one of them was the boyfriend. If I had, God forbid, gotten serious with someone without asking for her approval or pretending I needed it. I imagined her trying to frame it as a phase, or worse, a cry for attention. Then finally her message came, late that night. "Looks like you're having fun." 7 words, just enough to feign interest, not enough to ask a real question, just enough to pretend like she wasn't bothered, not enough to hide the weight of her disapproval. Still, I didn't answer. It wasn't about playing games. It wasn't about ghosting or being cruel. It was about forcing them to sit in the same void they had made me sit in for so many years. The void of being deliberately unacknowledged, of having something important to say and being met with polite nods or changing the subject. I wasn't going to fill in the blanks for them. If they wanted answers, they'd have to ask better questions. Or maybe, just maybe, they'd have to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. Later that evening, as we docked for the night in a quiet bay, lit by string lights and soft music, I got a call from Caroline. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity, or maybe a strange form of duty, made me press accept. Her voice came through the speaker calm but tight, like she was holding back something sharp. "Are you doing this just to prove you're not alone?" she asked. And the question landed so hard I had to sit down. For a second, I almost laughed. Because it was so predictable, so deeply in character for her to frame it that way. As if my happiness only existed in relation to my loneliness. As if the only reason I'd surround myself with people was to cover up a hole she assumed still existed. I could have said so many things in that moment. I could have explained the years of being the invisible daughter, of always watching from the margins while she got the applause and I got the silence. I could have told her about the panic attacks in hotel bathrooms before family dinners, the tears I swallowed every time our parents treated me like an afterthought, the way I'd slowly come to accept that maybe they just weren't capable of loving me the way I needed. But instead, I just said this: "No, I'm doing this because I've always been." And then I hung up. Because that was the truth. The core truth beneath all the glitter and photos and passive-aggressive silence. I wasn't trying to show them that I had people. I was showing them that I had always been the kind of person worth knowing, worth inviting, worth loving. with or without a damn +1. And that was only the beginning. There's something oddly surreal about watching your family celebrate a holiday from thousands of miles away, not as a guest who simply couldn't make it or someone who was tragically waylaid by weather or circumstance, but as someone who made the deliberate, almost surgical choice to remove herself from the narrative, to pull out the last thread that was holding together a story she never actually belonged in to begin with. On Christmas Eve, while they gathered around the same dining table that had hosted decades of passive-aggressive traditions and rehearsed politeness, I was barefoot in a white linen robe on the terrace of our villa in Mykonos, drinking coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through a poem, watching the ocean flex its indifference in the morning sun and thinking, really thinking, about what it meant to be seen, not just observed. The night before, after that call with Caroline, after her questions sank into my bones like a slow poison, "Are you doing this just to prove you're not alone?" I had stayed up late with Eli, just the two of us on the rooftop, wrapped in blankets and silence, sipping dark liquor we couldn't pronounce, and watching the stars argue across the sky. At some point I asked him, half drunk, fully raw, if what I was doing made me cruel. He paused for a long time, longer than I expected, and finally said, "Cruel would have been showing up at that dinner and pretending everything was fine." And I knew then that this wasn't about payback. It was about finally holding up a mirror to a family that only liked reflections they could control. By noon, I had decided that the photo alone wasn't enough. It was a disruption, sure, but not a reckoning. And deep down, I wanted something more pointed, something that would echo, something they couldn't just scroll past and chalk up to my dramatic tendencies. So I wrote 6 cards, one for each member of the family, and gave them to Tomas, who, in addition to being absurdly photogenic, also had handwriting so elegant it could make a grocery list look like scripture. Inside each envelope, I placed a carefully chosen gift, not expensive, not flashy, but sharp, symbolic, undeniable. For my mother, I sent a necklace, not a new one, but a cheap little trinket I had given her when I was 8 years old. A piece of plastic shaped like a heart, bought with saved-up allowance and childish pride. I had found it years ago in a junk drawer during a Thanksgiving visit, tangled in expired coupons and crusty batteries. I wrapped it in tissue paper and attached a note. "Thought you might want this back. It never fit me like it fit Caroline." For my father, I sent a first edition of his favorite novel, the one he used to read in the den while ignoring our arguments. The one he once told me, "A man has to read to understand disappointment." Inside I wrote, "Maybe now you'll understand a different kind." Caroline's gift was a framed photo of the two of us from when we were children, maybe 5 and 7, sitting in the snow, me crying, her smiling with a snowball in her hand, which she had thrown at my face seconds before the camera clicked. Underneath, in neat lettering, I wrote, "Thanks for always knowing when to hit me where it hurt." I sent her husband Matt a children's book, the same one he had mocked me for reading during my gap year when I worked at a literacy nonprofit, saying, "Is that even a real job?" Inside I scrawled, "No pictures for you this time. You'll have to use your imagination." For my Uncle Mark, who wasn't technically on the trip, but had always taken my parents' side in every family disagreement like he was auditioning for sainthood, I sent a bottle of wine from a small Greek vineyard. The label read, "Fermented by time, bitterness, and sea air." The note said, "Something you and I finally have in common." And for my grandmother, who had long since lost her voice to dementia, but whose silence over the years had often hurt more than the words of others, I sent a single seashell, smooth, small, worn, no note, just the sound of something that once carried life, now hollowed. I gave Eli the tracking numbers. I didn't expect to hear anything right away, and I didn't. I imagined the packages arriving one by one, their weight small but undeniable, landing like little tremors under the feet of a house built on denial. I imagined my mother unwrapping hers in the kitchen, alone, her face cracking for just a second before sealing shut again. I imagined Caroline's expression as she saw that photo, remembered the sting of snow in my eyes, and maybe, just maybe, Phil, wondered if she'd gone too far without even noticing. I didn't know. I didn't need to. It was out of my hands now. But the call came sooner than I thought. Christmas evening, around 7. My phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen pop up directly in over a decade. My father's cell, not the landline, not a message filtered through my mother, but his voice, raw and unbuffered. I picked up. For a few seconds there was nothing, just breathing. Then softly, as if saying the words cost him something real, he said, "Your mother's crying." And I, without skipping a beat, said, "Good, maybe now she feels something too." There was a pause after that. Long, loaded, like a storm was thinking about whether or not to break. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just said, "You could have come, you know. We would have made space." That, of course, was the final joke, because space was never the issue. It wasn't about a chair or a table or a plate of food. It was about the emotional geometry of a family that had always known exactly how to make me feel like the extra. I told him that. I told him calmly, clearly, without venom or pleading, just the truth, laid out like a dish no one had asked for, but was going to have to taste anyway. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, not vindicated, not victorious, just unburdened, as if I had finally said something out loud that had been sitting in my throat since I was 10 years old. And still, I knew it wasn't over. There's a particular kind of power in knowing more than everyone else in the room, not the smug, performative kind you might see in a courtroom drama or a sales pitch, but the quiet, simmering kind that hums just beneath your ribs, whispering to you that for once, you're not the one waiting to be understood, explained, or excused. For the first time in my adult life, I had orchestrated something not out of desperation, not as a reaction to being left out or overlooked, but out of the deep, bone-level understanding that people only question your choices when you step outside the roles they've locked you into. My role, for decades, had been the spare, the misfit, the question mark at the end of every polite sentence. And yet, in one single holiday, without apology, without permission, I had rewritten the script, not just for them, but for myself. And yet, as the days passed after that terse, clipped conversation with my father, after the gifts had landed with the weight of memory in each household, and after the group chat returned to its default state of dry silence, I knew the story wasn't quite done unraveling. Because what they didn't know, and what I had no intention of telling them, was that the photo they had obsessed over, speculated about, dissected in whispers, wasn't what it seemed. It was real, yes. Real people, real laughs, real water beneath our feet. But it wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was precise, calculated, intentional in a way that only people who have spent years being ignored can understand. What they didn't know was that 3 of the so-called models in the photo weren't models at all, not even remotely. Jasmine, for example, had worked in fashion, yes, but she also held a PhD in psychology, specializing in familial estrangement, and had helped dozens of women navigate the murky waters of inherited trauma and generational gaslighting. She wasn't just beautiful. She was a mirror reflecting exactly what my mother would find most threatening. A woman who knew who she was and didn't ask for validation. Leo, for all his quiet magnetism and well-tailored linen, wasn't just an old flame. He was the one person who had sat with me through my darkest spiral, a panic attack that left me half collapsed in the hallway of my apartment 5 years ago, triggered by nothing more than a voicemail from my mother, asking if I was planning to gain more weight this winter. He was there when I realized that sometimes love isn't about who you sleep with, but who shows up when no one else does. And while he may have looked like a casual +1, he was the embodiment of something my family never gave me: safe presence. Max, for all his tattoos and sharp wit, was a ghost of possibility, not a mistake or a fling, but a choice I never made because I was too busy trying to be digestible. He had offered me a different life once, messier, louder, less respectable by suburban standards. And I had walked away from it out of fear, not because I didn't want it. He was there now as a reminder that the boxes they had kept me in weren't real. I had stepped out of them once before. I could do it again. But perhaps the most interesting reveal, the one detail that made my stomach tighten every time I thought about it, was the sixth person in the photo. Tomas, quiet, observant, holding the camera like a shield. They didn't know that Tomas was not just a photographer. He was also an artist, a documentarian of identity and defiance, and had spent the last 6 months working on a project about people who had cut ties with their families to survive. What they also didn't know, and might never know, was that the yacht, the villa, the entire curated spectacle wasn't just a vacation. It was part of a larger installation, a piece, a portrait of what it looks like when a woman takes back the narrative of her own worth and sets it on fire for everyone to see. They also didn't know that the whole thing, from the pose to the people to the angle of the sunlight, had been captured not just for my petty satisfaction, but for a gallery show that would be debuting in Berlin that spring, titled, Without Subtlety, +1. The name was Eli's idea, of course. He always had a gift for branding pain into something elegant. He said it with a smirk the night before the shoot, sipping wine and gesturing out to the deck. You've spent your whole life being told you didn't need a +1. This is you bringing 6. So yes, I suppose you could say it was revenge, but it wasn't just for them. It was for every family dinner where I smiled through being interrupted, every holiday where my seat was 3 inches too far from the center, every wedding invitation that read Caroline and guest, but simply Natalie, in tight, lonely type, every time I was asked why I was still single, as if I were a waiting room and not a person. In the weeks that followed, my phone stayed mostly quiet. The group chat went back to its usual pace. Links to news stories, recipes, the occasional weather update. Caroline sent a photo of her kids in matching pajamas, and Mom heart reacted like nothing had ever cracked. Dad sent an article about heart health. Nothing direct, nothing personal. As if by ignoring the rupture, they could believe it had never happened. Until one day, weeks later, I got another message from my father. Just a photo, a family portrait taken in their living room, fireplace behind them, stockings still up, Caroline and Matt smiling, Mom seated in the middle. And beside my father, a young woman I didn't recognize, maybe in her 20s, smiling nervously, holding his hand. Underneath, a single sentence. Your sister's au pair joined us this year, thought we'd extend the invite. And just like that, they tried to pretend they understood. As if inviting someone else, someone new, was their olive branch, their proof that they were evolving, becoming more inclusive, more open. But it wasn't an apology. It was a performance, because what they still didn't understand, what they might never understand, is that I didn't want a seat at that table anymore. I had built my own, and it was bigger, and it was real. And no one had to ask permission to sit there.